Pull up a chair, let the cups clink soft. Little laugh in the corner, world talking on and off. Sip slow truth while the headlines drop. Welcome into Ken's Coffee Shop.
Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to Ken's Coffee Shop on this, well, here in Ocean City, Maryland, on this sunny 15th day of March in the year 2026. Can't believe I had to look at my calendar to remember what year it was, but hey, it happens at my age, folks. This was a triple witching weekend this weekend. We had Friday the 13th on Friday, of course. Yesterday was Pie Day, 3.14. Hopefully you all had your pie, whether it was a pizza pie or an apple pie. And of course, today is the Ides of March. So go out, if you have lunch, order a Caesar salad in his memory. We should probably celebrate the Ides of April in this country, since April 15th is tax day. Tuesday, of course, is St. Patrick's Day, hence the shirt with the shamrocks and everything on it today. I have a lot of memories of St. Patrick's Day because I grew up in Scranton. And Scranton, you may or may not know, has the 6th largest St. Patrick's Day in the United States. Pretty amazing for a city the size of Scranton, but it had such a great Irish influx in the mid-1800s, mainly because of the mines. We talked about the Molly Maguires last week. And so it was always a big deal there. I worked at the Kresge store downtown, not the Woolworth store. They were the arch enemies. And it was the busiest day of the year for us. It was packed because you would get 100,000 people in downtown Scranton. And I worked selling pizza and hoagies, and they would get hungry and come in for something to eat. But I wanted to do a little pop culture here today. We're going to talk just a little bit of a background on St. Patrick and St. Patrick's Day. It doesn't always have to be hard news, folks. St. Patrick's Day has been recognized in some form since his death in the 5th century. In case you're wondering, March 17th is the day St. Patrick died, not the day he was born. It's been a religious feast since at least the 10th century, and it was added to the church calendar, the Catholic Church, of course, because Catholics still have saints, and that was in about the 17th century. The first known St. Patrick's Day parade, I could give you 20 choices, and I doubt you would come up with the city. It wasn't Dublin. It wasn't Killarney. It wasn't Blarney. It wasn't anything in Ireland. It wasn't New York, Chicago, any of those cities you would think of. The first St. Patrick's Day parade ever took place in 1601. Goose and I were just young pucks back then. And that took place in St. Augustine, Florida, of all places, a Spanish colony. They happen to have an Irish vicar, and that's why they had the first St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day became a fixture, really, among Catholics by the 1700s as an excuse to break Lent and have a little party during the Lenten season. It became a huge thing in the U.S. By the mid-1800s as more Irish came in following the potato blight of 1845. And it actually became more of an American holiday than an Irish holiday. We took the religious feast, turned it into a big party, and then it has slowly made its way back to Ireland. Dublin now has a 4-day festival around St. Patrick's Day. The first parade in New York City was in 1762, and it is the oldest and largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the world. And a few years later, Chicago started that tradition they have of dyeing the river green. Oh, and you know that corned beef and cabbage you're going to have on Tuesday for St. Patrick's Day? Also, more of an American thing. The Irish would tend to eat pork and not corned beef. So another thing that we've added to co-opt somebody else's holiday. St. Patrick himself was born around 386 AD, or CE, I guess is the politically correct way to say it anymore. Probably born somewhere in Wales. He was Roman. We have to take credit for him. At the age of 16, he was enslaved and taken from Great Britain over to Ireland. And he would become he was in captivity. He would escape. And later, he would return to bring Christianity to the people of Ireland. He founded schools, churches, and monasteries throughout Ireland before he died on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. How ironic that St. Patrick died on St. Patrick's Day in the year 461 AD. So, doing a little bit of quick math, he made it to 75. Not bad for back then, right? Mr. Patrick, as I like to call him, was actually never canonized by the Catholic Church, was never officially made a saint. It was a period of time when a lot of saints crept into Catholicism that were not actually canonized. You might remember that Mr. Christopher medal you might have in your car, the patron saint of travelers. When St. Christopher was removed from the saints a few years ago when they did a little bit of culling of the ones that had never really been canonized. Why do we wear green on St. Patrick's Day? Did you ever ask yourself that? Or I usually wear red as an Italian just to be contrary. At the time, blue was actually the color of the ancient Irish flag, but the Irish rebels started wearing green during the Irish Rebellion of 1798, really to distinguish themselves from the redcoats, the English, who of course had invaded and had subjugated Ireland for centuries, ending, of course, with the Irish Rebellion in the 20th century. And the shamrock became a symbol of St. Patrick's Day, symbol of Ireland. It was only later that people explained it as it was representing the Holy Trinity, but it really just started as the national weed almost of Ireland, national plant of Ireland. St. Patrick's Day is pretty much an invention of the Irish Americans, although it's made it back to Ireland now. The earliest parade on St. Patrick's Day takes place in Ireland in the town of Dingle, starting just before sunup, sort of like the people voting in New Hampshire at the stroke of midnight, or in Maine at the stroke of midnight on Election Day. But it's spread worldwide. It's celebrated throughout the world these days. Any excuse, of course, to have beer and the like. The Scranton St. Patrick's Day parade is, of course, as I said, according to a 2014 article, it was the 6th largest in the country, behind cities like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Savannah, Georgia. Pretty big parade for a city the size of Scranton these days. They had their first parade of the current iteration in 1862. That parade's been going on for a long time, and it has been running more or less since then. Took a break for the 2 wars and took a break for 1 year of COVID, and the following year they had it in September, which didn't make a lot of sense, but hey, that's the way it is. You know, St. Patrick's Day reminds you of the Troubles in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. That's what we call the IRA campaign of all those years. It's the Irish call it the Troubles, the English call it the Troubles. And it brings me back in a way. I'm going to get all this to tie up to Columbus Day before I'm done. But the Irish Troubles, for the South, it wasn't really a religious war. They wanted independence for all of Ireland, because as you probably know, the island of Eire is made up of the Republic of Ireland, which is predominantly Catholic, has that great orange, green, and white flag. And then the 6 counties in Northern Ireland are under British rule. They are part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And so throughout, you really had differing reasons for fighting. While it was viewed as a religious conflict because the South is predominantly Catholic and the North is dominated by Protestants. It was really about independence and the South wanting to get Ireland unified again, and the North, the minority that the Protestants would be in a unified Ireland, wanting to keep Northern Ireland part of England. In a way, it reminds me of the American Civil War, which, if you believe the American Civil War was fought over slavery, you're really only looking at part of the picture. The South definitely went to war to preserve slavery, but the North did not go to war to end slavery. That's one of those great romantic notions we get in school that isn't quite true. In fact, there were 2 or 3 northern states where slavery was still legal during the Civil War. And in fact, slavery was not ended in those northern states by the Emancipation Proclamation. It was ended by the Civil War amendments after the Civil War. The South was fighting to retain slavery. The North was fighting to retain the South because it was a great source of raw materials. So you had differing reasons as to why they were fighting, but we want to simplify everything. We say it was over slavery. I mean, if you've ever read the Emancipation Proclamation, it would have allowed any Southern state who came back in the Union by January 1st, 1863, so a couple of years into the war, any state that came back into the Union by then could have retained slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was really a club to try to get the South to re-enter the Union. And Lincoln, as late as 1865, was still willing to consider surrender terms that allowed the South to keep slavery. The Lincoln assassination then led to a big groundswell of support for freedom of the slaves, and that led to the Civil War amendments. But one other thing that St. Patrick's Day reminds me of is that St. Patrick's Day, I doubt very many of the 100,000 or so people that were probably in Scranton yesterday for the parade, or the numbers that are in Philadelphia or New York for the parades, I doubt whether very many of them are thinking of St. Patrick bringing Christianity to Ireland, St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland, which, of course, didn't really happen. It is a day to celebrate Irish American or Irish pride. I mean, it really grew up and exploded as a way to celebrate Irish American pride, much as Groundhog Day, as I've mentioned before, is a day to celebrate German American pride in a certain section of Pennsylvania. And Columbus Day, which has been under attack in recent years. We celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Nobody is complaining. PETA doesn't get up there and say, we got to celebrate Snake Day instead of St. Patrick's Day because of what he did to the snakes. And Columbus Day has nothing to do with Christopher Columbus. It has to do with an Italian-American pride. It was an Italian-American holiday that, because of the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic organization, they decided that they would use Columbus as the rallying point. But it was actually created as a way to celebrate Italian-American pride. So I hope we remember that when we come up to October again this year. And that I know there's some states that are going to celebrate Native American Day and those kind of Indigenous Peoples Day and all that kind of stuff. Well, there are no indigenous people to North America. Everybody in North America came here from Asia, Europe, or Africa. The first humans in North America were ones who crossed the land bridge from Asia. So maybe when we come back to October, we can think of Columbus Day, same way we do as St. Patrick's Day, as a group of ethnic people celebrating their ethnicity rather than celebrating Christopher Columbus. So I wanted to throw that out there today. A couple of things I wanted to mention, a follow-up or two. Last week, we talked about Charles Burton, the man who was sentenced to die and was scheduled to die this week in the electric chair in Alabama. He had not actually killed anybody. He was part of a robbery where somebody was killed, ended up being charged under felony murder, and ended up getting the death penalty. Maybe your prayers help, but The governor granted him clemency and commuted his sentence to life in prison this week, so he was not executed. It happened, fairly late in the process, before his last meal, and it made me wonder, what would you choose for your last meal if you were in prison and you knew you were going to die? Some of the choices over the years have been amazing. People that I think ate so much they just wanted to get the coroner sick when he did the mandated autopsy, but others, just order a piece of pie and things like that. So what would you order for your last meal? Would you be able to eat if it was your last meal? I can't imagine that's that easy of a thing to do. I also wanted to talk about a man named Jason Hughes, and you may have seen this in the news this week. And it's a case where cooler heads and saner heads and true human forgiveness applied. Jason Hughes was a teacher, and he was a high school teacher in Hall County, Georgia, taught in North Hall High School. His wife, also a teacher. He's the father, or was the father, of two young boys. He died when a prank by students went wrong. It's a tradition in the school. They have these pranks, and one of them was they came over to toilet paper Mr. Hughes' house, and he knew it was happening. He was ready for it, and he was ready in a way that he was participating. When they came over and started toilet papering, he waited a while, and then he came out to confront them in jest. And of course, they all ran to their car to run away. And unfortunately, he ran after them. He tripped, he fell, he was run over, he was killed. And the driver of the car was being charged with manslaughter, a high school senior. A few others were charged with lesser crimes. And almost immediately, Mr. Hughes' wife started to petition the district attorney to drop the charges. Because, as she said, this was something that he looked forward to. This is something he took part in the spirit of the prank, and it was a complete accident. It was just a bunch of bad circumstances that led to his death. And to me, that was something that's it's something that I think gives you a little bit more faith in the human spirit, because the typical reaction in a case like that is, I want revenge, I want justice, I want eye for an eye, and I want to go to court and sue. So far, it looks like Mrs. Hughes is being very forgiving. There's a GoFundMe set up for the family, which is probably an even better way to help them out than a protracted lawsuit. And so the junior-senior week prank that led to a death is being, I think, treated in the right way, and gives you a little bit more faith in human nature. We also saw this week, thanks to the government shutdown, there is a partial government shutdown going on, folks. And of course, the thing being shut down is the Department of Homeland Security. And that means TSA doesn't have funding, and TSA agents are patting you down without pay right now just because they like to do it. But a lot of them not being paid just aren't showing up for work. And we ended up with 4-hour lines last week at George Bush Airport in Houston. People were out in the parking lot. The lines were wrapping around in the parking garage. The lines were so long. Hopefully something will break and we will get Homeland Security funded again, so TSA can get back to doing the things it does, including one of them. They have an app that tells you what their waiting times are at various airports. And right now the app's saying 15 minutes for everywhere because it hasn't been updated since the shutdown started. So if you look at the app, it's a 15-minute wait. If you show up at the airport, it may be 4 hours. But if you are traveling, remember that the delays might be longer than normal, and even delays may be creeping into those of you who have FastPass, because as TSA agents don't show up for work, the pre-check is one of the first things that they end up shutting down because they have to have the places open for the general population going through. Also, interesting story out of Canada. I saw it in a couple places this week that in Canada, which has a legal provision for assisted dying, for people who are terminally ill and in pain, can do assisted dying. Not quite as liberal as a couple countries in Europe where you can just say, hey, I don't like living anymore. I'm 20 and I'm tired of this world. I'm in good health, but I just don't want to go on. And you can do assisted suicide. Canada, you do need to have the irreversible health issue, the pain, and all that goes with it. But it now accounts for 1 in 20 deaths in Canada. So 5% of Canadians die from assisted dying. And there are a couple places in the United States where there is an assisted death provision in place. They tried probably about 10 years ago in Massachusetts, and it was defeated through the efforts of the Catholic Church. But it's one of those things that you really have to ask yourself, and I think all of us have to ask ourselves is, if you're in a position where you're in pain, you're not going to recover, you're just prolonging death, isn't it the right thing to be able to choose to die with dignity through assisted suicide? A friend of mine is very upset today because her dog was being put down. So we put down animals to keep them out of pain. And we've all probably done it with an animal in our life. It's a sad occasion. Usually it's the vet trying to convince you it's time for the animal and fighting the natural inclination that you have to try to keep that animal alive. We do the same thing with people. We hang on. We want them to hang on, even though they're in terrible pain and suffering. My mother died in 1981. She was short of her 62nd birthday, but she had lung cancer from years of smoking. And the last few months of her life were just a morphine-induced haze, where it would have been better for her for sure, to have been able to just put something strong in that IV and end their life. I'm lucky I have a daughter who, if the time comes and it's legal, perhaps even if it's not legal, she would make that decision because she's seen people as a doctor and suffering, and she knows that sometimes you aren't going to recover. So an interesting story from Canada, and I am still expecting a resurgence of states in the United States that will consider that, at least. A couple other things. Been a great week for fake news. You might remember the attack on the mayor's residence in New York. The original CNN report on it was a couple of Pennsylvania teenagers just enjoying a spring day, pulling a prank, and then they realized, no, it was actually Islamic inspired terrorism. And I even saw a couple memes where CNN was reporting that Japanese teenagers had come to Hawaii, which could have been a great beach day. And then, of course, they show Pearl Harbor burning. We had Lobstergate this week. Again, Seth Meyers, Colbert, others, CNN ran with this story that the U.S. military, the Department of War, spent $22 million on steak and lobster in just 1 month. $22 million on steak and lobster. What was Pete Hegseth doing? Having steak and lobster every night? Then they discovered the oops, that surf and turf is a traditional meal before deployment and for those stuck in a long deployment. And what shows up? We start seeing pictures from 2010 when First Lady Michelle Obama was visiting troops, serving them steak. So it really did show that the media has absolutely no feel for military life, and they'll do anything they can possibly do to attack the current administration. For those who have been in the military, I'm sure surf and turf is a great break from your MREs. The one change that did take place under the Trump administration for this tradition is they are now acquiring the steak and lobster through competitive bids rather than having it all supplied by two companies. So let's get into at least one current event issue of significance before we end, and that is the Iran war update. We're really not sure who's in charge because Mojtaba, the son of the former Ayatollah, was injured in the blast that killed the Ayatollah's wife and Mojtaba's wife. And there's stories that he was injured severely, may have lost a limb, may be in a coma. We haven't actually seen him live. And one of the things that's going to make it very difficult to end the war with Iran is it's never a good thing to go to war where the leaders know that you're trying to kill them. You know, until World War II and the trials we had in Nuremberg and in Tokyo, it wasn't common to kill the opposing leaders. But if you know you're going to die, and by the end of World War II, a lot of the German leaders knew that they were not going to be allowed to live if they surrendered, you keep fighting. And we may be creating that problem with Iran too, because the more you tell them, hey, we're going to just wipe out all of your leadership, there's no reason for the leadership to consider surrendering. Trump expected a very quick war with Iran. I think he expected a repeat of some of the earlier times when we bombed and then stopped. Maybe he was expecting the Grenada War kind of thing where it's over in a few hours. The war with the Barbary Coast, if you remember that one, lasted 87 minutes. Of course, that was a few centuries ago. But now we're getting threats out of Iran that they have these drones that could reach the United States. And what would the reaction of American people be if the U.S. was actually attacked? I mean, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, and we were attacked by a non-governmental force on 9/11. But for the most part, you know, America has another view of American exceptionalism when it comes to war. Wars are always things we fight elsewhere. I mean, there was a balloon bomb that exploded, and I believe it was in Oregon during World War II that killed a teacher and some students, but we weren't attacked on the mainland. Even Hawaii at the time, of course, wasn't even a state, and most people had no idea about Hawaii until the attack on Pearl Harbor. So what is going to happen if we find that the Iranians bring the war to the U.S.? Will we rally behind the war effort as we did after Pearl Harbor? Or will the division we have in this country continue as we see it today? The big development this week, of course, was the attack by the Iranians on ships in the Straits of Hormuz, where a large portion of the world's oil travels on a daily basis. We are now planning to invade, apparently, Kharg Island, which is a island a third the size of Manhattan, which lies there in the Straits, which would be a very good way to protect the Straits. And to me, I think if there's any good that comes out of this war, it will be that the U.S. establishes international control over the Straits of Hormuz. We can turn over, the responsibility for defending Kharg Island to the United Nations or NATO. So it's not us going alone. But we shouldn't allow a single country to be able to shut down a vital oil interest like that. We also have to remember we're fighting Iran, not Venezuela. They have a lot more weapons than Venezuela did. And, that when we went in, we captured Maduro and it was over. This could go on for a while. We've also saw this week a lot of press because it does seem like the U.S. was responsible for the bombing, the missile attack that destroyed the school and killed 160 or so young Iranian children, female students. And it looks bad. I've seen people call for resignation of the Secretary of War. I think AOC's called for impeachment of the president, saying if we impeach the president, he is an impeached president. One of these days, we'll talk about what impeachment really means. But, it is collateral damage. It's terrible. But where were these people when 40,000 Iranian citizens were being murdered for protesting? Where were they earlier when hundreds of citizens were murdered for protesting the murder, the torture and murder of an Iranian young lady who just was guilty of the crime of not wearing the official dress when she went out? It's a bit ironic that Iran, which doesn't really believe in educating women very much, that Iran's making such political hay out of the death of female school students, because we know that their record on what they do with females in that country is not great. Final thing to talk about, and still part of this whole Iran thing, is it possible that somebody in the administration, I'm sure it's not Donald Trump, I don't think he can develop things that well on a global basis, but it might be Marco Rubio, it might be career people in the State Department. Is it possible that all of this ties in Venezuela, Iran, and even we saw this week overtures for talks with Cuba? Goose will be able to go down and get his cigars whenever he wants. Now, overtures with talks for Cuba on normalizing relations between ourselves and them. And there's one common thread to Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. They all have a close tie to China. And China, my friends, not the Soviet Union, which is no longer the Soviet Union, not Russia, but China is our main military foe in the world. They are the biggest threat to the United States. And is it part of a greater strategy that we're getting close to making a regime change in Iran, possibly controlling the Straits of Hormuz, most likely, that we replaced the leader in Venezuela, that we're talking to Cuba? Trump wants Greenland, and we get what we need in Greenland simply by setting up permanent bases there. But he wants Greenland because both the Soviet Union, Russia, and China have seen Greenland as a major military objective because of its ability to control the Northern Atlantic and its proximity to the United States. That's the same reason why we maintain some control over the Panama Canal, even though we've turned over ownership, but why Trump would like to get the Chinese company that's running the Panama Canal out of there, because it's a vital trade route. So could it actually be that there is a method to all this madness? Only time's going to tell. But if this war ends soon, my original response a couple of weeks ago was, if it's over in a month, we still have a couple of weeks to go. But if it ends soon and we end up with control of the Straits of Hormuz that we can keep on a permanent basis, and we get regime change in Iran, and we actually replaced one hardliner with an even more hardliner, which isn't a smart thing to do, maybe it's all been worth it. And I know I have some friends who are worried that, if we invade if we invade Karg Island, it's very easy for Iran to attack it. Well, it's also easy for Cuba to have attacked Guantanamo at any time, but they don't. They turn the water off every once in a while, but they don't attack it because of the retaliation that would take place. And same thing would happen if we get international peacekeeping force that controls the straits, has a presence on Karg Island. We are going to neutralize the Iranian threat. We're going to neutralize the pirates, the rebels who have attacked shipping in the straits, and we may actually be able to guarantee the free flow of oil through the straits, which helps the entire world. So let's hope there is some method to the madness. Let's hope that is what we are seeking to do in all this, and let's hope it succeeds, because it actually would be a positive for the entire world, positive for the people of Iran to have a less hardline leadership that maybe didn't torture and execute somebody for not wearing the proper covering when they left their home. And oil is so vital to the world, and we've seen what's happened with gas prices since the war started. A little bit of security there wouldn't be a bad thing. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Got a few things we didn't get to this week, but we will get to next week. As always, I can tell you the truth, but I can't make you believe it. I can lead you to it, can't make you believe it. If you would like to contact me, it's Kenny B Seeking Truth at Gmail, KENNYB Seeking Truth at gmail.com. Or you can go to Facebook for Seeking Truth, my Facebook page. It's not called Ken's Coffee Shop, as I've told you, because too many people call and ask whether we serve lattes. Also, remember, Facebook, you want to follow Cole County Entertainment, because that's where you get the links to all of their shows, live or replays on demand. So make sure you are following Cole County Entertainment. Make sure you are following Seeking Truth. Email me at KennyB@gmail.com if you've got any comments, questions, or suggestions about things to talk about. And until then, till next week, we will keep the coffee on. And I hope you have a wonderful week and enjoy St. Patrick's Day this coming Tuesday. Goodbye, everybody.
Pull up a chair, let the cups clink soft.